The year was 1872, and the Wyoming plains groaned beneath a sky heavy with snow. Winter bit at the bones of every living thing, and the wind carried with it a sound that made even the hardiest horses roll their eyes and stamp their hooves. Miles from town, a lone rider bent low in the saddle, his duster stiff with frost, his breath turning to smoke in the dark. Jacob Kincaid had meant to be gone another 2 weeks, driving cattle south, meeting buyers, filling the coffers that kept his ranch alive. But business had gone quicker than expected, and the gnawing pull in his chest for home had dragged him back sooner. The gelding beneath him huffed and stumbled through the drifts. Jacob patted the animal's steaming neck, his gloved hands stiff with cold. He thought of the cabin light that would be burning against the dark. He thought of his 2 boys, Eli just turned 10, full of stubborn grit, and Samuel, barely 8, with a laugh so bright it could melt snow itself. Jacob pictured them racing to the door when they heard hooves shouting "Pa!" the way only sons could shout it, as though the word itself was a prayer. He leaned on that picture now. It warmed him better than the whiskey flask buried in his saddlebag. But as he crested the last rise and the valley spread before him, unease began to crawl up his spine. The ranch lay silent. No smoke curled from the chimney. No hound barked greeting from a yard. Only a pale flicker of lamplight leaked from one small window. Jacob's eyes narrowed against the snow. He told himself it was the hour, late, with most honest souls abed. But still, something felt wrong. He nudged the horse into a trot, the crunch of hooves against frozen earth carrying him closer. The porch steps came into view, draped in ice, the railings sagging under frost. And then his breath stopped. There, huddled on the top step like strays, were 2 small figures. Eli's arm was wrapped around Samuel, their bodies pressed close, their coats thin as paper against the biting wind. Their faces were pale, their lips tinged blue. Jacob was out of the saddle before the reins hit the ground. His boots slammed against the porch, the boards groaning under his weight. "Eli! Sam!" His voice was sharp with fear. The boys stirred weakly, eyes blinking open. Samuel tried to smile, but his teeth chattered. "Pa!" Eli's voice cracked like dry timber. "She said we couldn't come in." For a moment Jacob thought he hadn't heard right. Couldn't come in? His jaw clenched so tight it ached. He stripped off his gloves and pressed his hands against his son's icy cheeks. They felt like carved stone. He tore his coat free, wrapping it around both boys, pulling them against him. Heat rose in his chest, not from a cold, but from fury. "Who?" His voice was low, dangerous. Eli swallowed, glancing toward the door. "Mary." Jacob's stomach turned. Mary, his wife of 3 years. Their stepmother. He had married her thinking she'd bring comfort to the house, a gentle hand for 2 motherless boys. What he saw now was a cruelty he could scarcely comprehend. He lifted Samuel into his arms, steadying Eli with the other hand. They clung to him like lifelines. Jacob shouldered the door open with a crack that echoed through the night. Warm air spilled into the porch, carrying the smell of firewood and stew. The sting of the contrast nearly blinded him. Inside, Mary sat near the hearth, her figure wrapped in a shawl, a steaming cup in her hand. The fire threw a soft glow across her face, pretty, poised, untouched by hardship. She looked up lazily as if surprised to see him, but not rattled. "You're home early," she said, voice smooth as silk. Jacob's boots thudded hard against the floor as he strode inside, lowering the boys near the fire. Samuel whimpered as the sudden heat seared his frozen skin, and Jacob hushed him, rubbing his arms, willing the blood to move again. Eli sat stiffly, glaring at Mary with a look far too old for his years. Jacob rose to his full height, his shadow stretching long across the plank floor. His eyes locked on Mary. Why were they outside? His tone was not a question. She sipped her tea, her expression cool. They needed discipline. Boys grow soft when they're coddled. I told them to wait until they learned respect. The words were oil on flame. Jacob's fists curled, every muscle taut. He stepped closer, towering over her, his voice low enough to chill the blood. "Respect? You call freezing children respect?" Her eyes narrowed, a flash of defiance breaking through the calm. "Don't take that tone with me." They disobeyed. They needed to learn. Jacob's breath came hard, each inhale a battle against the rage storming inside him. He wanted to shout, to break the cup from her hand, to make her understand the line she had crossed. But he didn't. His voice dropped lower still, steady as steel. You ever put them out again, and it'll be you shivering in the snow. Mary's lips pressed in. For the first time, she looked away. Jacob didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to the boys, pulling them close against him, wrapping the blanket tighter. Their small bodies trembled in his arms, and he knew the cold wasn't the only thing that had seeped into them tonight. Betrayal left a frost no fire could fully chase away. The fire popped, filling the silence that stretched long in the room. Samuel finally spoke, his voice muffled against Jacob's chest. I thought you weren't coming back till next week. Jacob kissed the boy's damp hair. I came back soon as I could. And in that moment, he realized fate had brought him home early for a reason. Had he stayed gone, had the boys been left another night under Mary's rule, he might have returned to graves instead of shivering bodies. The thought struck, so hard he nearly staggered. Eli lifted his chin, eyes shining with unshed tears. She don't like us, Pa? Jacob met his gaze, firm and unflinching. Then it's on me to make sure that don't matter. Mary shifted in her chair, the shawl slipping from her shoulders. You're making more of this than it is, she muttered. They'll be fine. Jacob turned his head slowly, his eyes catching the firelight. They're my blood. They're all I've got. You don't touch them, you don't command them. You don't even look at them cross unless you want me to forget I ever called you wife. Her mouth opened as if to reply, but the words withered before they left her tongue. She stared at him, then at the boys huddled by the fire, and finally turned her face away. The room grew quiet again, save for the hiss of sap in logs. Outside, the wind clawed against the shutters, searching for cracks to slip through. Jacob's hand smoothed down Samuel's back, steady and sure, while Eli leaned against his side, stiff as iron. The three of them sat together, a fortress built not of wood or stone, but of blood and vow. Jacob stared into the flames, his jaw set. He had built these walls high to keep the frontier out, to shelter his family from the wild that prowled beyond the pasture. But tonight, he learned the wild didn't always come howling from the prairie. Sometimes it wore a shawl and smiled by the fire. And as the flames leapt higher, casting long shadows across the cabin walls, Jacob swore silently to himself, never again. Whatever storm lay ahead, he'd meet it. For his sons, for the blood that bound them tighter than iron. And though the boys shivered still, their eyes heavy with exhaustion, they clung to him as though they knew it too. The real warmth in that house wasn't the fire. It was their father back from the trail, standing guard over them with a heart too fierce to freeze. Morning broke sharp and gray, the kind of cold that cracked timber and made every sound ring harder across the valley. Jacob Kincaid rose before the sun as he always had, but the weight of the night before sat heavy in his chest. He pulled on his boots, the leather stiff with frost, and listened to the silence of the cabin. The boys lay curled beneath quilts near the hearth where he had kept them through the night, the fire still throwing out embers. Their cheeks carried a faint trace of color again, but their breaths were shallow, weary. Across the room, Mary stirred in bed, eyes opening as if nothing had happened, as though she had not tried to teach his sons a lesson by leaving them to the mercy of the storm. Jacob's hand went to the brim of his hat, resting on the table. He thought about the trail, about the men he had dealt with who carried knives in their boots and lies on their tongues. He realized the danger he had always feared out there had already seeped inside his home. By breakfast, the tension in the cabin had thickened like smoke. Jacob set bread on the table, a pot of beans, and what was left of salted pork. Eli and Samuel sat quiet, glancing at their father, waiting for permission to eat. Mary moved about, as though she owned the room, laying her own plate full, her shawl pulled snug over her shoulders. You'll spoil them, she said, watching Jacob pour milk for the boys. They grow up soft if you feed them before they earn it. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He wanted his sons to eat, to grow, to feel the steadiness of his presence outweighing her bitterness. Still, He caught Samuel's flinch when Mary reached for the breadbasket, her nails clicking against the wood. Eli sat straight, his eyes fixed on her like he was daring her to take more than she deserved. It was a small thing, that breakfast, but Jacob saw the truth clear as a noon sky. Every bite, every word, every glance from Mary carried a knife's edge for his boys. She wielded her power in quiet cuts, the kind that left no mark for the world to see, but bled a child's spirit dry. When the meal was finished, Jacob saddled his gelding. He needed town, supplies, yes, but also answers. He'd been gone only weeks, but gossip traveled faster than any horse. Something about Mary had soured in his mind, and he meant to know what. The ride into town cut against the wind, his duster flapping like wings behind him. Snow crunched beneath, iron shoes, the trail marked by rabbit tracks and the paw prints of wolves hunting lean. Jacob rode, with his hand near the holster, not out of habit, but instinct. Every sound seemed sharper now, every shadow heavier. The settlement was a cluster of buildings bowed against the weather: saloon, blacksmith, general store, church. Men nodded as Jacob passed, their eyes tracking him with the caution reserved for those who carried both reputation and silence. He tethered the gelding outside the store and stepped in. Warmth hit him along with the smell of coffee, leather, and grain. A few men stood by the counter, hats low, voices low. Their talk cut off when Jacob entered, then resumed in murmurs. He pretended not to notice as he gathered flour, coffee beans, and lamp oil, but words drifted anyway. She's been seen more than once with him. Ain't right, not with Kincaid out workin'. Heard she's got eyes on more than his land. Jacob's shoulders stiffened. He set his items on the counter, his gaze steady on the clerk. Put on my account. The clerk nodded, eyes flicking nervously to the men at the back. Jacob picked up the sack and turned, his boots striking hard against the floor. On his way out, he caught the faintest whisper. Asterisk saw her near the river with him. Asterisk, the words rode back with him heavier than the supplies. By the time he reached the ranch, dusk had fallen, and the boys had cleared the yard of snow as best their small hands could manage. Samuel waved when he saw his father, a flash of joy that cut through the chill. Eli stood tall beside him, shovel in hand, trying to show his strength. Jacob dismounted and ruffled their hair, pride mingled with sorrow. They deserved a gentleness he wasn't sure he knew how to give. But he knew one thing: they deserved safety, and Mary had stripped them of it. Inside, Mary busied herself with sewing by the fire. She looked up when Jacob entered, her face unreadable. "You were gone long," she said. Jacob set the sack down. "Had business." Her eyes narrowed. Business or gossip? The room stilled. The boys shifted, sensing the charge in the air. Jacob's voice was calm, but iron lay beneath it. "What gossip would I be hearing, Mary?" She smirked, a twist of her lips that carried both contempt and challenge. "Men in town have loose tongues. Best not to listen." Jacob stepped closer, the fire catching the lines in his face, the years carved by trail and toil. Loose tongues don't put children in the cold. Loose tongues don't make boys whisper to their father that their stepmother hates them. Mary's sewing needle froze midair. Her eyes glittered, hard as ice. "They're liars if they said that. Little brats, ungrateful for what I give them." Eli bristled, his small hands clenching. Before Jacob could answer, Mary lifted her hand toward him, quick and sharp. It never landed. Jacob's hand shot out, catching her wrist mid-swing. The crack of it stopping filled the cabin louder than any slap. His voice was low, deadly steady. "You ever raise a hand to them again, I swear by God and all that's holy, you won't draw another breath under my roof." Her face flushed with fury, but for the first time fear rippled in her eyes. She jerked her arm back, cradling her wrist, lips pressed in. Jacob turned his back on her and crouched beside Eli, smoothing his hair. The boy's eyes burned with unshed tears, not of pain but of pride that his father had stood for him. Samuel clung to his brother, silent but trembling. That night, Jacob kept his rifle close. He sat by the fire long after the boys slept, listening to the wind batter the shutters, to Mary shifting restlessly in the shadows. His mind replayed the whispers, the looks, the unfinished words of men in town. He saw flashes in his memory. Mary slipping out once at dusk, saying she needed to fetch water. Mary's smile when she thought no one was watching, a smile too secret for any wife. The pieces fit together like jagged glass, and the cut they left in Jacob's gut told him the truth. She wasn't just cruel. She was dangerous. Still, a man didn't act without proof. Out here, justice was swift and often final, and he wouldn't damn himself without knowing the full measure of her betrayal. But he had seen enough to mark her as a threat. The only question now was how deep the rot ran, and how long before it reached for his sons again. Toward dawn, as the fire dwindled and cold crept into the corners of the cabin, Jacob whispered a vow to the silence. They'll never be alone in the cold again. His words hung in the air, weighty as iron, binding him tighter than any law. The frontier could break a man, but it had not broken him yet. If it came to it, he would burn down everything he had built before he let it claim his boys. And as the first gray light seeped over the horizon, Jacob knew the storm inside his home had only just begun. The storm came 3 nights later. Snow drove sideways across the valley, rattling the shutters and howling through the seams of the cabin like a chorus of wolves. Jacob Kincaid stood at the window, his hand resting on the cold frame, watching the white veil swallow his land. He had known storms, on the trail on the high plains, in country where men froze stiff in the saddle, but this one felt different. This one belonged not to the wilderness, but to the war brewing inside his own walls. Behind him, Eli and Samuel dozed on the rug by the fire, their bodies wrapped in blankets, their small breath steady. Mary moved like a restless shadow, pacing, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. For days, she had been sharper than usual, every word clipped, her gaze darting toward the door as if waiting for someone or something. Jacob saw it all, each flicker, each restless breath. He had not pressed her. Not yet. A man didn't tighten the noose until he knew the guilty one had nowhere left to run. By midnight, the truth spilled out. Jacob had gone to the barn for wood, the cold cutting through his coat like knives. When he returned, he found Mary crouched by the hearth, rifling through his saddlebag. She froze at the sound of his boots and turned, her hand clutching the pouch of coin he'd earned from a cattle run. Her face carried no shame, only defiance. "You're a fool, Jacob," she said, rising slow, the pouch dangling from her fingers. "All this sweat for a ranch that will kill you in the end. There's easier ways to live." His jaw hardened. By robbing a man blind? Her lip curled. By leaving behind what drags you down. Them boys, this land, even you, none of it's worth a damn. I've got a better future waiting. The words struck colder than the storm outside. Jacob's voice dropped, heavy with steel. With who? Before she could answer, a knock slammed against the door. Hard, urgent. Eli stirred, blinking awake, and Samuel whimpered in his sleep. Jacob's hand fell to his revolver as Mary's eyes lit with something wild. "You'll see," she whispered. The door burst open before Jacob could move. Wind and snow blasted in, along with 3 men. The one in front was tall, broad-shouldered, his beard thick with frost. His eyes went straight to Mary and hers to him. Behind him trailed 2 leaner men, pistols drawn, faces half hidden beneath scarves. Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and his sons. His revolver cleared leather with a slow, steady motion. "This your better future, Mary?" Her smile was a blade. "Better than freezing out my life with your brats?" The tall man, her lover, Jacob reckoned, lifted his chin. "Hand over the money, Kincaid. You and the boys can keep the ranch. We'll be gone before sunup." Jacob's finger brushed the trigger, his eyes never leaving the man's. "And if I don't?" The outlaw's smile widened. "Then you're dead before the fire dies." Tension crackled thicker than the storm outside. Eli clutched Samuel close, eyes wide, his young body trembling. Jacob heard their breaths, felt the weight of their fear pressing into his back. He knew what these men were. He'd seen their kind on the trail, wolves in human skin, hungry for blood and gold. And he knew one thing certain, If he gave them the money, they'd take more. They'd take everything. Mary stepped closer to the outlaw, her hand brushing his arm. Kill him if you have to. Just don't waste time. Jacob's chest tightened. He had chosen her once, believed her soft smile and gentle voice. Now she stood, urging his death, in front of the boys. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. The tall man leveled his pistol. The fire hissed in the silence. Jacob's mind went sharp as glass. He dropped low, his revolver roaring before the outlaw's finger closed. The shot cracked through the cabin, shattering the hush. The outlaw staggered back, clutching his shoulder, cursing. His men fired wild, bullets splintering the doorframe. Jacob dove behind the table, shoving it over, pulling his sons behind him. The cabin exploded with sound, gunfire, shouts, the scream of Mary as she lunged for the pouch of coin. Jacob's revolver barked again, one outlaw collapsing near the hearth, his pistol clattering across the floor. Smoke filled the air, acrid and thick, mixing with the stench of gunpowder and sweat. "Stay down!" Jacob shouted to Eli, pressing the boy's head low as a bullet tore through the overturned table. Samuel whimpered, his small hands clutching Jacob's coat. The tall outlaw reloaded, his face twisted in rage. "Kill him," he barked. The last gunman advanced, crouching low. Jacob waited, breath steady, eyes sharp. He squeezed the trigger, once, twice. The man spun and fell, crashing into the woodpile, dead before he hit the floor. Silence fell, broken only by the wind screaming through the open door. Smoke curled toward the rafters. The tall outlaw staggered to his feet, blood soaking his sleeve, his pistol trembling in his grip. Mary clung to him, eyes wild. "Shoot him," she shrieked. But Jacob was already moving. He rose from cover, his revolver steady, eyes locked on the man before him. "This is my house," he said, his voice low, steady, final. The shot rang out. The outlaw fell, dragging Mary with him. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the boys' ragged breaths. Mary pulled herself free, crawling toward the door, her face pale, twisted with rage and fear. She looked back, once, meeting Jacob's eyes with a glare that carried no love, no regret, only hate. Then she vanished into the storm, swallowed whole by the night. Jacob lowered his revolver, chest heaving. The room stank of blood and smoke, the floor littered with broken glass and bodies. Eli's eyes were wide, fixed on his father. Samuel clung to him, sobbing into his coat. Jacob crouched, gathering them close, his arms wrapping tight around both. His voice broke as he whispered, "It's over. I've got you. You're safe." But inside, he knew safety was a fragile thing. Out here, nothing lasted forever. A man could build walls, dig trenches, stock rifles, but the truest fortress was his own resolve. And that, Jacob swore, would never falter again. They buried the bodies come dawn, the storm easing into a gray silence. Jacob's shoulder burned from a graze, but he worked through it, his boys at his side. Eli held the spade with both hands, jaw tight, eyes hard. Samuel clung to Jacob's coat, too young to dig, but refusing to leave his father's side. Together, they laid the outlaws in the frozen earth, marked by nothing but piled stone. As the last stone thudded into place, Jacob straightened, his breath misting in the cold air. He looked at his sons, their small faces pale, but proud. "This land is ours," he said. "No one takes it. No one takes you." Eli nodded, his chin high, carrying a weight too heavy for his years. Samuel whispered, "We got you, Pa?" Those words carved themselves into Jacob's soul deeper than any scar. He gathered them close again, the three of them bound not just by blood, but by fire, by battle, by the storm they had survived together. That night, as the cabin settled into silence and the boys slept warm against him, Jacob stared into the flames. The betrayal still cut, the wound raw, but a truth clearer than any winter sky burned inside him. Walls of wood and stone could fail, wives could betray, storms could break men in half, but a father's duty, his love, was the truest fortress, and he would stand it no matter how the wind howled,